Why, hello. We're up to chapter 7 of the Cabbage Patch War. It really is war now, too. We're on page 51. Chris's heart was not breaking. He was enjoying being Dad's coach. No beer until it's over, he told Dad, and you only eat at meal times. No snacks. No beer, said Dad. Mum and Chris both shook their heads. So that was it. Fruit for breakfast, salad for lunch, nothing for tea, no grog. Dad moaned and groaned. But he stuck to it. He was worried. He didn't want to move either, and he didn't want to lose. Chris looked out the window. Wacker cycled by. Yes, cycled. He was exercising on a bike. Robin told me that he'd taken a month off work. He was going to exercise and train all day, every day. I can't do that, said Dad. We can't afford it. Every morning Chris woke Dad up at 5 and took him jogging. At first it was 1 kilometre, then 2. In the end it was up to 20. Gradually Dad started to lose weight. Half a kilo, a whole kilo, 2 kilos. His trousers started to hang loose and he had to buy new ones. He was getting back to his old self. You look terrific, said Mum. It's doing you a world of good. Wacker looks terrific too, Chris said. His beer gut is almost gone. Dad will have to do push-ups every night or he's going to lose. Dad hung his head. And after that he'll have to do laps at the pool. Dad looked as if he was going to pass out. Okay, he said. Let's do it. Well, it went on like this for 3 months. Train, train, train. Push-ups, chin-ups, squats, skipping, weightlifting, diet, 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 carrots, celery, tomatoes, cabbage, bought from the shop, apples, oranges. One night, Chris caught Dad sneaking down to the fridge and eating ice cream. Chris took it from him and gave him a stern lecture. You have to stick to the diet, he said. You have to win, even if that means giving up ice cream and beer. Dad nodded sadly and walked slowly back to bed. I'm going to keep going because it's chapter 8 now. Finally, the day of the big weigh-in came. Dad went up to the bathroom for one last check. 75 kilos, Chris said. Have you been to the loo? Dad nodded. Don't worry, he said. I've squeezed out every last drop. We all trooped outside, the whole 8 of us. Wacker's wife, Anne, had put up a tent on the front lawn. The whole cricket club was there to support Dad. And the guys from Rotary had come to cheer for Wacker. Mr. Richards from down the street was the umpire. They trusted him because he was in the cricket team and Rotary as well. Robin and I sat up the back. We knew that we didn't have much more time together. Robin had tears in her eyes. Don't worry, I said. We can always write to each other. Robin looked at me. You're my best friend, she said. Life just won't be the same without. She was never going to finish that sentence. The big weigh-in was starting. Wacker walked out with a towel wrapped around his waist. A big cheer went up from the Rotary guys. There was a screen for Dad and Wacker to walk behind as they had to weigh themselves in the nude. Chris's eyes nearly popped out of his head. It was hard to believe. Wacker's beer gut had completely vanished. He looked thinner than Dad. And he wore a huge smile. We were going to be the ones to move. After you, said Dad. Wacker walked behind the screen and gave a little speech. As he spoke, he waved his hands over his head like a boxer. I've trained hard, he said. I've eaten wisely. I'm the lightest and the best. You can kiss Johnny boy goodbye. Then he dropped his towel and stepped onto the scales. Mr. Richards peered at the numbers. 74 kilos, 996 grams, he said in a loud voice. A great cheer went up from the Rotary guys. Wacker was 4 grams lighter than Dad. We were going to lose by 4 grams. A hush fell over the crowd as Dad stepped up for the weigh-in. He walked behind the screen and dropped the towel to the ground. Dad stepped towards the scales. It was all over. He was going to lose. We would have to move into a different area. Poor old Chris. He was as white as a sheet. All that work, that running, the training, the advice, the early morning runs, all for nothing. His lips were trembling. He didn't care about moving house. He just wanted Dad to win. They were such good mates. I felt sorry for Chris. After all, he was only a little kid. Suddenly, Chris thought of something. Yes, he yelled. Yes, yes, yes! Chris rushed up to Dad and whispered in his ear. I could see that Dad was terribly upset. He bent down to listen and then started to cough and splutter into his hands. Then he straightened up, he shook hands with Chris and stepped onto the scales. Mr. Richards looked down. Everyone was silent. 74 kilos, 900 and... He bent down to look at the scales more closely. 95 grams. A huge cheer went up from the cricket club. Dad had won by 1 gram. Everyone rushed forward and patted him on the back. It was a very happy moment. Mum's eyes nearly popped out. She didn't know how he could have lost the extra 5 grams. Neither did I. Robin will have to move, I said sadly. Terrific, said Sky. We don't. Hayden looked at Dad's white skin. Revolting, he said. We did it, shouted Chris. We won. How did he do it? Said Mum. I just don't get it. Jack didn't say anything at all. Neither did Julie. She just looked upset. Dad and his supporters came back to our place for a barbie. There was no smoke coming from Wacker's yard this time. We had won. Now Wacker would have to move. So would Robin and Anne. Wacker had to keep his word. The war was over. Mum stood on a chair and peered over the fence. Look at this, she said. We all climbed up and stared into the garden. Wacker was standing there with his arms around Anne. They were both crying. They didn't want to leave their home. It was so sad. Suddenly, a voice piped up. Dad, someone said, I have to talk to you. Dad looked down at Julie. It was me, she said. What was you? Said Dad. I took the cabbage. I hate cabbage, and you always make us eat it. I was going to own up, but everyone was making such a fuss. You took the cabbage? Said Dad. Julie hung her head in shame. Dad hung his head in shame. I blamed Wacker for nothing, he said. There's only a few pages. Let's finish. Chapter 9. Dad and Mum looked at each other. Mum nodded her head and Dad jumped over the fence. He was pretty nimble now that he'd lost so much weight. He held out a hand to Wacker. Put it there, mate, he said. You don't have to leave. It was all my stupid fault anyway. I'm sorry I blamed you for taking the cabbage. Wacker stared at Dad and then he held out his hand and smiled. You beauty, he said. Come over and join the party, said Dad. Robin and I just hugged each other. We were so happy. Chris looked up at me. He's a great bloke, is Dad, he said. Kind to everyone. Wacker and Anne came over and joined the mob. So did the Rotary crowd. It was the best barbie ever. Wacker ate 15 sausages without stopping. That must be a world record, Chris said. Dad put down the barbecue tongs and looked at Chris hungrily. His mouth was all wrinkly. Have you got something of mine, Chris? He asked. I feel like a feed myself. He gave his moustache a bit of a lick and smiled. You couldn't see his teeth. Sorry, show you the picture. Wow, I said. Disgusting, said Julie. Fantastic, said Sky. Revolting, said Hayden. So that's how you did it, said Mum. Jack didn't say anything. He's not old enough to talk yet. He doesn't even have any teeth. Everyone's mouths just hung open. Chris fished around in his pocket. Then he pulled out Dad's false teeth, the ones he'd taken from Dad just before the weigh-in. Chris looked up at Wacker. They weigh exactly 5 grams, Chris told him with a grin. Exactly 5 grams. That's it. How good was that? Great ending. Paul Jennings is really good at creating suspense and having a twist in his stories. I hope you enjoyed that. I did. And maybe I'll see you for another story another time. See you later.